All right, so finishing up section 6.4, the other part of this section is factoring quartic trinomials. So we're just going to go back to our quadratic trinomials and just talk about how we factored these. So basically, these are the ones that we did using a table. We just looked for some numbers that would multiply to give us the last number and add to give us the middle number. So the first one here we had something like x minus 5, x plus 3. Negative 5 times 3 gives you negative 15. Negative 5 plus 3 gives you negative 2. Middle one, two numbers that multiply to give you 14 and add to give you negative 9. Well, 7 times 2 gives you 14, but to get that negative 9, they would have to both be negative. And again, negative times negative will give you a positive 14. And then the last one, we're trying to get two numbers that multiply to give you 5 and add to give you 6. 5 only has two factors, 1 and 5, so 5 times 1 is 5. 5 plus 1 is 6. All right, so now what we are doing here in this new notes is really not anything different. The only thing that is, it's a little bit different because our first term, instead of being an x squared, is an x to the fourth. But if we were to factor, let's just say this was x squared plus 7x plus 6, we would factor this and we would just say x plus 6, x plus 1. Right? 6 times 1 is 6, 6 plus 1 is 7. So the only difference here, because we did x times x gives you x squared, if we want this first term to be an x squared, we multiplied x times x. But now in these new problems, since it's a quartic, the first, the highest power is a 4, that means it's quartic instead of quadratic, meaning the highest power was 2. If we're trying to get that to be a 4, then what we have to do is, instead of that first term being an x, it now has to be an x squared. So it's going to be x squared, they're both starting with x squared. And then we ask ourselves still the same thing. What two numbers will multiply to give you 6 and add to give you 7? So plus 6 and plus 1. Now the other thing that we have to do here to finish out the problem is, because these are quadratic binomials, we also have to now look for difference of two squares to finish out the problem, which we don't have that here because these aren't differences, these are both sums. X squared plus 6, x squared plus 1. So this one is finished the way it is right here. Okay, so we can't do anything else with this. This one is done the way it is. So we're going to box that one, final answer right there. So go ahead and start this one off. Try and factor that one. I would suggest you pause it, try to factor it, and then come back and see if you have it correct. So hopefully you paused that and you factored and you ended up with this. X squared minus 4, x squared plus 2, right? Because negative 4 times 2 gives you negative 8, and negative 4 plus 2 gives you negative 2. And again, we're starting with x squared now because x squared times x squared gives you x to the fourth. But this is, like I was just saying in that last problem, this is one where now this first binomial, x squared minus 4, this is a difference of two squares. X squared plus 2, we cannot do anything with this, so that is just going to be recopied. But x squared minus 4, this is a difference of two squares, so we can rewrite that as x plus 2, x minus 2. All right, so this section right here, x squared minus 4, is this portion of the answer. Okay, those two are equal. Where this part right here, like I said, we can't do anything with this, so we just kind of brought that down into the next part of our answer. But that is one thing that you have to double check here with these now is do we have something that can factor further to make sure that it is completely factored all the way. All right, so that is your final answer there for that one. I'm going to skip over number 3. This is going to be one that I want you to try, and I'm going to jump to number 4, and then I'll come back to number 3. So let's work with this one here. So again, whenever we're solving something with these quadratics or quartics or anything like that, where there's factoring involved, we want it to be equal to 0 first. So first of all, we're going to take and subtract 12 from both sides. We want to move that over and set it equal to 0. All right, so x to the fourth minus x squared minus 12 equals 0. Now, going into our next step, again, this is going to be an x squared right? Both of these parentheses are going to start with x squared. And we want to find out what two numbers will multiply to give us negative 12 and add to give us negative 1. So that's going to be a negative 4 and a positive 3. Okay, negative 4 and positive 3. So now you have two ways of looking at this. First of all, just like that last example we did, this is another reason why I wanted to jump into this one. X squared minus 4 does factor further. But the only time that that is necessary to do is when you are factoring only. If you are solving like this one, it's not necessary to do that because it'll all come out at the end here when we do our final steps. So it is not necessary that you do that second step of factoring. You can do it and you will still get the same answer. But what is more important is that since we're solving this, we have to split it up where they're being multiplied. So x squared minus 4 equals 0. So let's go ahead and solve that one. So we move the 4 over, so add 4, and we end up with x squared equals 4. We want to get rid of that x squared. We want to get rid of that x squared, so the opposite of squaring a number is taking the square root. So we go ahead and take the square root of both sides. This is one thing we have to remember from what we had done earlier. Whenever we take the square root of both sides, we have x equals, we don't want to just say x equals 2. Okay, this is what we have to remember, is that we don't want to forget that plus or minus sign. Alright, so the answer here is x equals plus or minus 2. That is part of our answer, x equals plus or minus 2. Alright, now let's get our other answers that are going to come from this other part, the x squared plus 3. So x squared plus 3 equals 0. Move the 3 over, so minus 3, minus 3. And we're left with x squared equals negative 3. Take your square root of both sides. We just did a square root, which means don't forget your plus or minus, but more importantly, or not more importantly, but just as equally as important, is we need that plus or minus, but we have a negative under the square root. That has to come out as an I, and then we're left with the square root of 3. So don't forget the plus or minus. Don't forget the negative comes out as an I, and then we're left with that square root of 3. So there are your answers, and again, the highest power tells you how many solutions you have. Our highest power here is 4, so that tells us we have 4 answers, which we do. Positive 2, negative 2, positive I root 3, and negative I root 3. So there's your 4 solutions. So now let's jump back to number 3, example 3, and go ahead and try that one. Pause the video, try that problem, and then come back and see how you did with your answer compared to what I have up here. Alright, so hopefully you paused it and tried it out. This one is already solved for 0 or set equal to 0, so we're ready to just jump right into our factoring. So we need two numbers that multiply to give us 18 and add to give us 11. So that's going to be 9 and 2. So we're left with x squared plus 9, x squared plus 2. So then we set them each equal to 0. X squared plus 9 equals 0, or x squared plus 2 equals 0. So I'm going to just look at this left-hand one first. Alright, so first of all, we subtract 9 over. So I'm left with x squared equals negative 9. And then, just like in the last example, in this step right here, I didn't want to fill it in there, so I just wanted to show you that's what we're doing right here. We take the square root of both sides. So we have a couple parts here, again, plus or minus. Negative came out as an I, and the square root of 9 is 3. So plus or minus 3i is your answer to that portion. Over here, let me just get rid of this now. Same steps. It's just a little bit different because we're when we do this step of taking a square root, we are left with the plus or minus. The negative comes out as an I, but square root of 2 doesn't simplify at all, so we're left with plus or minus I times the square root of 2. Alright, so again, the factoring part, the solving part, this is stuff that we've seen before with quadratics, with x squareds. We're just adding that extra exponent of a 4. So it's really a similar process. It's a couple extra steps, a couple extra little things here and there that we're doing. We're adding in from the other things that we had done in chapter 5. So we're just kind of putting a lot of different things together here in solving these type of problems. But again, like always, make sure you're trying those homework problems and let me know if you have any questions. And just send me an email and let me know.